details here. Well, why we are here today, September 5th, the International Day of Indigenous Women. Why should we gather here today? We know that this year has an important meeting, international meeting, the Conference of the Parties of the Convention on Biological Diversity, the 16th edition of this convention. And of course, that many grassroots and women's movements are mobilizing to have access to decision-making spaces like this COP, right? But beyond that, going beyond that, one element that I think would be interesting to think about is to actually promote traditional practices and real solutions led by Indigenous women to preserve and maintain biological diversity. We know this is a core element within the convention, but we actually were looking to promote those real solutions, community-led solutions, led by Indigenous women particularly, to halt biodiversity and forest loss. And of course, consistent with all the customary practices and the spiritual practices of Indigenous people. Another objective is, of course, to voice the concerns, the resistance struggles, but also the proposals, right? Many Indigenous women are leading important processes in many parts of the world. So this is a platform today to address those concerns related to the biodiversity crisis and actually manage to or scale policy action towards the equitable sharing of the benefits arising from the use of traditional knowledge and practices. So this is all from my side now. And then maybe we can go to the next slide so that we could have a round of introduction directly from our speakers, Agnes, Wilma, Shruti, and Yolanda. So I'll give you the floor. Maybe we can begin with Agnes, sharing about yourself, about your organization, introducing yourself, the name of the people you represent, your community, and your country. Go ahead, Agnes.
Okay, thank you so much for this invitation. I'm so happy to be part of these amazing women. My name is Agnes Leina. I come from Kenya. I come from northern Kenya, but settled and married in southern part of Kenya. So two diverse places, but the same community. I represent the Massai community or the Samburu community, Turkana from northern Kenya. And I work for an organization I founded. It's called IIFB Community Concerns. It means caretakers, caregivers, and caretakers of human beings and as well as the environment. And something else that I wanted to say is that I'm also the coordinator of gender in IPACC, Indigenous People of Africa Coordinating Committee, which is the region of Africa network that we have in Africa. So, and I'm the coordinator for gender. I'm happy to be a panelist in this amazing workshop today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I cannot be able to show my face because if I do that, it completely affects the quality of my presentation. You know, I cannot even my audio and everything, but I might eventually just put once and then after that I put it off.
Yeah, thank you. No problem, Agnes. Thank you. I'm not sure if Mayal is here or she was able to join. Maybe she had some internet connections, but maybe we can go with Wilma. Wilma, compañera Wilma, ¿nos escuchas bien?
Valentina, we cannot hear you. Your audio is not working good. But Wilma? Sí, por favor, te toca. Si puedes ir adelante a presentarte. Gracias.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank the hosts of this space and send my greetings to everybody who is here present and following us on this platform. And third, in recognition of all the women who are Indigenous or non-Indigenous who have made this recognition and these struggles possible for International Women's Day, the International Day of Indigenous Women. I would really like to thank you all for your work, and I'll introduce myself now. I am Wilma Mendoza from CNAMIB, Bolivia, and I'm part of the Mosetén community here in Bolivia. CNAMIB, our organization, is jurisdictionally part of the 9 areas and that we have in Bolivia, and we have collective rights and
Gracias, Wilma.
communities
¿Me
that we
escuchan
that we
mejor? ¿Me
manage here.
escuchan bien?
Thank you for having me.
Ok, gracias. Gracias, Wilma, por estar aquí. Te agradecemos mucho porque hayas podido dedicar tiempo para compartir con el mundo sobre lo que está pasando en el territorio allá en Bolivia. Y tenemos también a la doctora Yolanda Terán de la Foro Internacional Indígena sobre Biodiversidad y de la Red de Mujeres Indígenas sobre Biodiversidad de América Latina. Si se puede presentar, adelante, doctora Yolanda.
Dr. Yolanda, would you like to introduce yourself? Yes, hi, can you hear me? Hello, sisters, can you hear me? All right.
Sí, sí, podemos
Hello.
escucharlo, Yolanda.
Yes, we can hear you, Yolanda. Hello, I am Yolanda Terán from the Quichua nationality in Ecuador. And I'm part of the Indigenous Forum for Biodiversity. And I've been working on human rights and Indigenous education and everything that has to do as with Indigenous peoples for many years. And so I will leave it there. I am from Ecuador. Thank you for the invitation. And thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you, dear sisters. Thank you.
English is working, yay. Awesome. Okay. All right, let's carry on then. We can now move on to the presentations. We can start to hear from our incredible speakers of the day. Let us begin with setting the scene, effective participation of Indigenous women in decision-making, from Dr. Yolanda Terán of the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity and the Indigenous Women's Network on Biodiversity. Dr. Yolanda, over to you.
Good morning. Good morning, dear sisters. I want to start by thanking you for the invitation and sending you a warm welcome from the International Forum of Women about Biodiversity and the Indigenous Women Network globally and for Latin America and the Caribbean. It's important for us to be here together, having a conversation, exchanging ideas, and understanding and learning from each other. We know that in 1992, the biological convening was approved, and with the signature of several countries, and throughout the years, we have got more supporting countries. Logically, this convening was created to stop the stealing of our resources and our traditional knowledge. And the objectives are the conservation of the biodiversity, the use of this one, and the benefits that come from the use of genetic knowledge and traditional knowledge. Within this convening, there are important articles that had to do with our life, survival, and one of them is Article 8J that refers to traditional knowledge and innovation and practices, and then Article 10C about the constitutional use. And we are wondering now, we're all here together, talking, discussing, sharing our work, but I want to tell you that the inclusion of the Indigenous women and young people in local communities wasn't an easy thing, in a way that in 1976, when there was a meeting in Argentina where they were talking about traditional knowledge from indigenous countries or people, several people from Latin America, South America specifically, went to Argentina to request the inclusion in these discussions, and it wasn't accepted. And so Spain got some funds and got all the indigenous communities to come to Spain to create the work group for 8J and the program of activities for 20 years. That program has been finished now. And among the achievements that we've had, where we had pamphlets with information that we should all know about the bond guides of benefits, the Aquacoco guides, which are impact studies. After the study of a project, we have ethical guidelines for indigenous investigators and the informed previous consent. We have achieved that in 20 years. We have got the inclusion of more indigenous women in the discussions of biodiversity. We have got the visualization of our communities, but logically, we need to keep working in the application of all these achievements. Now, you may be wondering how were they able to participate? In one of the meetings in Bratislava, there were only 5 or 6 indigenous women participating. And they decided to get organized and create the indigenous network, the global indigenous network of women, with the financial support of one country and one organization from another country. And at the end of that meeting, they decided that each organization needed to create its own women organization for Latin America. The main office is in Panama, and the coordinator is Florina Lopez Miro. And how have we participated? We had to learn on the road. We had to reinforce our knowledge, seeing what our needs are, understanding what was happening in the moment. And that's why we had participated in meetings about that biodiversity, about human rights, locally, nationally, and internationally. We have read documents. Happily, in the Women's Network, we have academic colleagues, and we have been able to support each other reading those technical documents, giving our points of views, and preparing our position as indigenous peoples for those meetings in which we're going to participate. We have worked on workshops for the region with funds from Spain and Japan, and through an agreement with the Secretary of the Biodiversity Convening. And why do we have those capacitations? To work the topic of biodiversity and to emphasize our traditional knowledge, and also to teach elements, instruments of women's participation and young women in these workshops. We include 20% of young men, because they also need to understand what is the work for the indigenous women, so they can show solidarity to our work. And we also have participated in negotiations. We have learned to put together different negotiation elements for women with no indigenous communities, and we have been able to improve little by little to the point where we can say, and we can talk about indigenous diplomacy and indigenous negotiations tactics. We have also participated in different discussion topics in the biodiversity convening, which are 16, and we are also part of groups of negotiation for Nagoya Protocol and Cartagena's Protocol. And in Nagoya Protocol, personally, as one of the negotiators, because I was able to speak in English and I knew about the topics. And for these topics of negotiation, you need to know that after 6 p.m., we don't have interpretation. So the person that will be representing us needs to be able to speak English or French or any other language, but we don't speak in Spanish after 6 p.m. in these negotiations, which makes our participation very difficult. I want to also share with you our path. We have put together our spiritual and knowledge, our relationships, our connections, because it's not easy to go in this path alone. And we have also learned what things need to be implemented and what things are lacking as well, as per our knowledge. And there are new challenges. Some that are coming up soon are, first, working together, working with all the indigenous communities in the whole continent, so we can create the work group 8J. And there are many interrogations here. Would it be a subsidiary group? Would it be a new group completely that will continue with the implementation of the 20 previous activities that we had worked in the past 20 years? What are we gonna do? There are many challenges. We need to know we are very clear in our position. We want direct financing, our own money that we can administer, where men and women, young children, and local communities can be included, and where we can actually participate
Hi,
in
Dr.
this
Yolanda.
new
If you could begin to
in this
wrap
new
up in a
time.
minute, that would be fantastic.
In this new challenge that we have, what we need to put together is our knowledge that we have gathered in the last 20 years, but we also have to be conscious of the implementation of the new work frame of biodiversity, taking into consideration and reading what the goals are and what are the objectives, and seeing what is that we need to implement as Indigenous groups, as Indigenous women. For instance, Indigenous women need to be more involved in the gender plan of the CBD. In the goal 21-22, where we talk about our participation, what does it mean? How are we going to participate? With what financing are we going to participate? And what I want to say to conclude is that we have to work in a work frame of respect, inclusion, and understand that we need to be able to speak other languages. For Latin America, it's a challenge, the knowledge of English. We need to put together all our spiritual wealth and the knowledge of the laws. I thank you for all this time, and I wish you a great session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yolanda, for grounding us, for grounding this webinar. And really, it's also incredible to hear that you're already seeing the changes in real time of all the incredible work that you're doing on the ground. Fantastic. So we'll hear more from you soon. So now we're going to move into the next segment of the evening. I'm going to hand the floor to Juana, who will do a round of guiding questions for all of our speakers today. Over to you, Juana.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening for some of you, and happy International Indigenous Women's Day, which we're celebrating today. In my maternal language, I would say. And I also wanted to say
Yes. Am I audible? Yes, I'm fine. Yeah, can you hear me now? Okay, yes. Okay, like, yeah, I'm from a place, I'm from Sikkim, Northeast India. So basically, I'm an environment activist. And when we talk about the biodiversity, like we are doing a lot of, the community is like been fighting against the hydropower dams in our region. Like one is 500 megawatts, other one is 300 megawatts. And we have been fighting against these two dams for a very long time. It's been like more than 17 years. So I just want to give a brief background of our region. I'm from a region called Zongu. This Zongu is protected under the Article 371F of the Indian Constitution. So we have our own law that in this region, the people to enter Zongu, the only indigenous Lepcha communities are settled in this region. So to enter this region also, they have to take a special permit from the district authority, And even there's a lot of laws that even outside the indigenous Lepchas from other than Zongu, they cannot go and enter and they cannot buy land and settle there. So I'm from a region where the Kanchenjunga, the third highest mountains, which is declared by the world as a World Heritage, that is in the region and is a biosphere reserve, So we as an indigenous community, though we are converted to Christians and the Buddhists, but the community there, we are animists, we worship mountains, we worship sacred lakes, sacred forests, and we believe after we die, we don't believe heaven or hell. What we believe is after we die, our soul travel back to the Kumzu land, means a soul resting place, which is at the foothills of the Mount Kanchenjunga. That soul by the shamans, the priest, Lepcha priests and priestess, after we die, the soul has to go back from the river called River Rongyong, one of the tributaries of River Tista and Rangit. We have two major rivers. So that's the very strong belief that we have in the communities, So that's why for us, the river and the mountains are very, very important. So for that reason also, we've been fighting this against the hydropower dam for many years. We haven't allowed the government to propose this to construct the dams. So for that we had a historical hunger strike way back in 2007 to 2009. For 915 days, a community had a really hunger strike. And so with that, we could scrap 4 hydropower projects, which was inside the Kanchenjunga National Park. So these are the things that we've been working. Apart from that, the community, the women's, we are solely like we worship the lake and all. So we have a lake called Tungkyung De. That is one of the, we have a Lepcha have it from a different clans. So each clans, their origin stories are from the rivers, the caves, the spring water, So the origins, our origin stories are based on these ecologies and in this environment and in this geographical area. So that is why it has made us very strong to fight against the construction of mega dams. So with that, what we are doing is we are working with the women, they are for conservations and all. So with that, in the movement itself, we've been worshipping, we've been thinking, but a lot of the things not been documented. The documentation is done by a lot of research has been done by the outsiders, like a lot of Americans, Europeans and Indians have done a lot of research on Lepcha indigenous community. But what we have realized on the movement that we have realized that we have to do our research ourselves, So because a lot of the document data will be with us. People who have done research, they have taken all the data outside, and that is the concern, that realization that has come up. So with that, we did this Lepcha clan workshop, because a lot of the indigenous knowledge are with the elders. So a lot of the youngest generation are moving out of the, from this to the city in search of educations and in search of job. So with that, to connect these two community, these two generation, we had this workshop, and we work on the Lepcha clan workshop, because each clan have different origin stories. Some origins are from lakes, some origins from mountains, some origins. When we are at the end of the day, this story then we have documented in form of grassroots comics. why it is was like it is a very children friendly and even people who cannot read and write, they can just see the pictures and all, and we have made a scanner up there. After we can scan it, they can audibly, they can hear the stories, you know. So this is it has become very important to show the outside world our perspective, you know, because for them, for the international financing agency, for the government, they see our mountains and rivers in terms of dollars or money or in materialistic. But for us, it's like we cannot compensate, we cannot sell the, you know, the which is like the land which has been identity, which is our you know, very strongly believe that we have culturally and rituals, like realistically we have like very have a strong belief. Even the shamans, you know, when they do rituals, because I was doing this community led research, when we were doing research we came to know. Yes, yes. Okay, okay, okay.
Wilma, can you hear us? Yes, yes, in Spanish. Okay, Wilma, so I will ask you the question in Spanish then. And thank you for being here. The question is basically, it's the first part of the question because we have 3, right? And we're going to have 5 minutes to answer each one. So how do you see your community? How does your community perceive biodiversity, and how is it affected by biodiversity loss at the local level and also in Bolivia? And how does this affect men, women, and children in different ways, if there are different ways that they're affected? Oh, thank you. Thank you once again for this question. I'll go right to it because the minutes are running by. Okay, so how does it affect people in the community? Well, things are very different now. I'll focus on my community in particular. I'm from an indigenous community called the Massai community. And for us, the issue of biodiversity is really everything. We are in a collective territory and we have a common home. Our environment is our common home for all of us, male and females who live there. And so everything is complementary within the space. There is a sense of equilibrium with biodiversity. And we're in contact with Mother Nature in what we call our common home. And so in the past, things were all well distributed according to that equilibrium and the knowledge that we had, but now we're feeling the effects of changes. For economic reasons, things begin to become thrown out of balance, and Mother Nature and the forests are out of balance, including flora and fauna. Because if you attack one thing, then the whole equilibrium is thrown off. So if we talk about Mother Nature in my territory, for example, in my community, after the land titling, there were all these conservation areas identified and areas of forest use and grazing and sacred areas, right? It was all organized. And then we began to have these management plans with a specific purpose. And those were just used in times of hardship. For example, when there were illnesses and these kinds of things. But through our own norms, it became difficult to control things, and it was difficult to select the different products and things that would be grown. And so when all of this began to happen, all the precious balance became thrown off, and things, the parcels were changed. And my community is a productive community. And we have diversified crops that we grow. And so the main thing is to have the balance and the biodiversity and the economy that is sustainable over time. So these days, maybe it's not so much in my community that we're affected, but rather it's from the outside. Other social groups that we have here in Bolivia are intercultural, and they buy land. These are individually held lands, and they'll use it for 5 years with monocultures, for example. And it really affects water scarcity and forest fires, which are terrible right now in Bolivia. In the eastern Chaco region, we have a terrible problem with forest fires. And so we're losing our food security, and all of the equilibrium that we used to have. And there is a difference in how men and women are affected. We do believe that it's different. Women are very greatly affected because we're the ones who make handicrafts. We transmit knowledge, education, health, technology, all of the things all of the knowledge that is gained in the space of the biodiversity that is our common home is affected when the equilibrium gets thrown off. And so currently, since we don't have as many trees, there's a lot more stress on women in terms of food security. They have to travel further to get the materials to do handicrafts. But for men, it's different. It's different because men basically are involved in generating economic income for families. And many times they go to another place to work, and they're not constantly in the community. And young people, well, if we want to talk about these days, our young people have gained a lot of knowledge. Many times they go and study in the city, and they appropriate the knowledge about environmental impacts and the economy, but they gain a lot from the outside as well, and and also the material issues, the material things. Thank you, Wilma. We still have a couple more questions left. I would like to know if Agnes is here again. Agnes, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Oh, there's someone I cannot hear. Joanna, I can't hear you. But I don't know whether you can hear me. Yeah, I can't hear you. I can't hear anyone. Let me see. Is it the translation? Let me check this translation. My translation is fine. I don't know what the problem is. I can't hear anyone. Oh my God. Valentina, I can only see you, but I can't hear you. So now what do I do? Do I just go on? Maybe I should just go on with the question, you know, how my people see biodiversity. They see biodiversity in terms of the flora and fauna, in terms of the plant species. Because we are pastoralists, we will talk more about plant species because we really are people of dryland and of savanna grasslands. And then in terms of shrubs and acacia trees, we have like hundreds of acacia species, acacia trees. And then we have riverine ecosystems, which has water bodies and waterways. Then we have also biodiversity in terms of mountains and hills, and a lot of rangelands, because we are pastoralists. And as pastoralists, we use a lot of, we make very good use of biodiversity. Can you hear me, everybody? Okay, thank you. So also biodiversity in terms of grazing areas, because we are pastoralists. So we have grazing areas, we have lowlands, which is below the mountains, and hilltops, or even on top of the mountains. During dry times, we go on top of the mountains because we have our own traditional way of conserving some biodiversity, something for the like grass and other species for our domestic animals and even wild animals, because the Massai community or the pastoralist communities are the ones which live with wild animals, and we have lived with them for ages, for years and years. We even know the sound. We even have totems. Some families believe that they have the totem of the. For instance, let's just even give an example of maybe elephants. They believe that even if they come next to an elephant, it cannot do anything to them. You know what I mean? So we have wild animals in plenty, and we live with them. And we also have medicinal plants. Those just grow naturally on the lowlands as well as the hilltops. And we have bees and honey, as well as all the floral species for the quality of honey that is produced by the bees. We have forests and plains, not very many forests, but we do have forests. And it's in the forest that we get medicinal plants, and we have all the medicines that we get, that we need for ourselves and for our animals. So how are we affected? How are women affected and girls? Women and girls are affected more and in a very different way from the way it's affecting men and boys. For women are the ones who fetch water. Women go for between 4 to 8 hours a day to fetch water, and as well as girls. So definitely they will be affected if there's no water. Women also work for many, many hours to go and fetch firewood. And therefore they're affected if there's no firewood anywhere near, because they're the ones who take care of their families in terms of food systems, in terms of nurturing their families. It is the women. And so women suffer more in the hands of biodiversity laws because of the caretaking responsibility that they have for their families. And so men are also affected because they're the ones who will take the cows for grazing, and it means they will have to go far, walk so many hours a day, or even go for months and weeks without food, and they'll go far away without family until maybe it rains, because we are affected by droughts. I think you may have heard about pastoralists and drought. We depend on livestock for our livelihoods, and if there's no grass for life, that's our livelihood, that's our accounts, that's our food. So definitely we get so much affected. So, and then In terms of the girls also get affected because if they're going to school, they will drop out. And the reason for dropping, they have to go and fetch water with their mothers. They will not be able to wash their uniforms and they cannot go with dirty uniforms to school. They will have to, some of them drop out and go and get married because they get so tired of going to fetch water for long hours. So they go near the town and find somebody who has running water with a tap and they decide, oops, there's water here, I better stay. And that really affects even our own programming because we do so much about girls, we care so much about girls' education and we don't want them to drop out that young to go and get married. So that is affecting our girls big time. Again, it's also affecting the youth, the young boys. The young boys will go to the local tracks. They get to the tracks and then go and fetch sand. Here we call sand, because it's one of the things that I should have mentioned, we call it white gold. So they go and fetch sand to these big lorries, and then they drop out of school because they want to look for some little money for themselves. So this is really very, thank you for this, sharing this. Yeah, so this is really a very big problem for our youth, and they are also disproportionately affected by loss of biodiversity.
Thanks, Agnes. Can you hear me now?
Yes, now I can hear you,
Yes,
Jana.
yeah, it was the problem of canals. Yeah, I was in the canal, original canal. Okay, thanks, Agnes.
Oh, okay.
Thanks very much to all of
Yeah.
you. So we could hear clearly that this biodiversity is really in a different way is understood in the communities. Like
Yeah.
in Bolivia is seen as our house, while in Africa, in this pastoralist region, is seen as the flora and fauna of the grazing zones because you are pastoralists. And in Mayal was saying us that they see basically that are like these hills, this water, that's why they are fighting against this water hydroelectric power station. So that is interesting how they see biodiversity our in indigenous communities. And also clearly they explain us that this affect in a different way to women, men, and children. So because of that time, I just would like to go quickly to the last question of this round. I would like to hear from you, Agnes, that now you are on the line. What are the challenges that indigenous women and girls face in your community to preserve this traditional knowledge? Although you already explained the challenge, maybe you can give a bit more, let's say, explanation and about this one, this challenge.
Yeah, one of the challenges to protect forests and biodiversity from our end is lack of policies and some guiding principles to inform collective traditional ways of protecting forests and biodiversity. It's unfortunate that everything is being seen in the eyes of the science only, scientific. Oh, we want a scientific research, scientific data, scientific evidence. Just because there is no scientific research and evidence about our own traditional principles and our own traditional ways of protecting our diversity, it is not being recognized. So there is lack of recognition and respect for traditional indigenous knowledge systems and leadership in the protection of forests and biodiversity. It needs to be recognized and it needs to be respected. And if it's possible, then make it a research and then let it inform policy so that we can inform policy and make it into the laws that protect our biodiversity so that it is recognized nationally.
Yeah.
And again, we have unfavorable laws that govern forests and biodiversity. In some countries where, here in Africa, where forests are gazetted, like in Kenya, forests are gazetted government property. So the government protects the gazettes the forest, and therefore indigenous people are always evicted rather than being protected. So instead of evicting them, just you can even gazette it, but no need of evicting indigenous people from their land. Just protect them, and they are the ones who have protected the biodiversity in the first place. It is always the indigenous people because they've lived there for millions of years. Then how do you just come and start telling them, oh, you don't know how to protect this forest, get out of this forest, we are better in protecting the forest? No, that is a very big challenge and we don't want it. And then in some instances also, there is poverty. And in terms of poverty, it's a hindrance where people cut trees to make charcoal. And then they sell the charcoal as an income generating activity. So, and that despite even the moratoriums, in some countries there's moratorium to ban charcoal selling and charcoal burning, but people will still do it because they are poor and they need some money. So we actually need to make sure that the biodiversity is protected by the people themselves. The people themselves have been there for years and they have protected their biodiversity, and they can continue to actually protect, because also we have medicines. Our medicines come from the land, from the forest, from the lowland, from the hills. Then we have the wild animals. The wild animals are being protected by the people themselves. So the biggest challenge again is people are being evicted. For instance, right now, the Massai in Tanzania, in Ngorongoro area, are being evicted so that to pave way for conservation. Why should they be evicted? They have always protected those animals and they've lived with those animals. Even in Kenya, a lot of our land has been taken away so that it paves way for very big things, many things, including the conservation, including parks, national parks for wild animals, and including what they're calling clean energy, mega dams, mega geothermal plants, mega wind power plants, and people have been evicted to pave way for all that. And in the process of evicting people and giving what they are calling clean energy, they are actually completely destroying the ecosystem, the biodiversity, completely. All our birds have moved along the rivers. All our wild animals have run away so that they can construct whatever they want to construct. So those are some of the challenges. I've mixed all of them at once.
Thanks, Agnes. Really very good. Your proposal, your challenge you presented. So Mayal, can you hear me? Can you also maybe present, or yes, you can tell us some of those challenges also in your region or community? Mayal, can you hear us?
We have yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes. Go on.
Yeah. So we've been facing a lot of challenges like any other indigenous community. Number one, I have already said that because of hydropower project, there are a lot of, the panic, there are a lot of very, unhappy with the government, because we have a community meeting that we have as a community, we have given a biggest consent that we will not give any hydropower clearance, forest clearance for the hydropower project. So, and other thing is like women, because of climate change and global warming, our state is having every year we are having a disaster. So 4th of October 2023, that is last year, we had a South Lonak Glacier Lake outburst. Because of that, 1200 megawatt dams, which was from the upper region of our upper region from the community where we belong, that got washed away within 10 minutes. So they are like a lot of almost the bridges, the road, there were a lot of casualties that was happened. And the Indian government did not declare as a national disaster. So till today, the community, or even the indigenous Lepcha community, has not even more than, it has become more than for 9 months, they haven't got any compensation. The government has not talk about any rehabilitation and resettlement. So we have even approached the court of Sikkim High Court, saying to the Chief Justice to take a suo motu for these issues. But that too, it's been more than 2 months. Like we haven't got any information from the court. So now recently, again, we're having a meeting that we will approach the court and we'll follow the public interest litigation, proper public interest litigation. So these are the concerns that we are facing. You know, other thing that our region is very beautiful, very beautiful, and we are rich in biodiversity, like flora and fauna, and we are good in doing village ecotourism. So we as indigenous, like the young activists, we have left our regular colleges and we have left the government job, and we are just fighting for the, you know, to save the land. So we have started this homestay, you know, where we can sell our, you know, the beauty, the biodiversity, the rich biodiversity that we have, and we're working on this. So we have getting succeeded in declaring one lake, which is in my village, as a biodiversity heritage site. So because if you cannot do, and if you cannot make it in the paper, you know, declare such site, it'll be very difficult to fight against a big project coming to a region. So recently also we have a one mountain called Manikchu, which is like even the Sikkim state the biodiversity you know, government has sent that to declare that that mountain under the biodiversity heritage site. So these are the thing we are doing. So we have started ecotourism. So we are getting a lot of tourists, and without selling our land, we can just save our land, and we can we have been, you know, trying to, you know, tell the outside world our perspective. You know, these mountains,
Thanks,
our
Mayal.
lands, and our rivers are not for sale. So this is what I really wanted to share.
Mayal, thanks very much. We will come back again to this last part you are just telling us in the second round. I want to give some also opportunity to Wilma. Wilma, ¿puedes escucharnos, por favor?
Can you hear us, Wilma?
También podrías decirnos
Could you
¿no?
also
cuáles
tell
son
us
los retos que
what are
ustedes
some of the
enfrentan
challenges
en vuestras
that you are
comunidades
facing in your
para,
communities
¿no? preservar el conocimiento
to preserve
tradicional
the
de
traditional
nuestra
knowledge
comunidad?
in your community? The specific challenges are because of the government policies, the extractivist policies that we're facing, that the women that are organized have to face every day. They're incrementing and they're fighting to get the previous informed consent. And the biggest challenge as women organizing from the Amazonian with 4 nationalities is to consolidate our own autonomy. And with that, we have always said that we should have an opportunity to formulate our own public policies to have a good administration and be able to govern our own territories. And for that, we have different actions. We are present in different communities and working with different organizations, nonprofit organizations, giving visibility to the collective rights and the damage that women are going through. We're working also on norms to be able to get this conservation and this resistance against all these issues that we're facing with the mining, with the expansion of the agricultural border, the fires. Nobody's really taking care of those things, but the government should actually be dealing, implementing, helping, but nobody deals with it. Also, the lack of water. There's a lot of contamination of water because of the gold mining. And people are being pushed out of their homes, and that affects the families within our organic structure and our decision-making space. We work on all these things, but we need to start recognizing the rights of Indigenous women in Bolivia. Where we have seen is that we need to continue consolidating our autonomy. And that's what I wanted to say. Very clear. Because of time, I think we're gonna try to get a common message from all these participants. I'm gonna pass it now to Chitira so she can continue with the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juana, and thank you, incredible, for these incredible talks. I think there's so much there. Each of these, your 5-minute talks could be a PhD thesis, really, and we wish we could hear more. Actually, we get to. Actually, the next 15 minutes, we're going to dive deeper into some of these concepts. So, Valentina, over to you. Perfectly.
Yes, it is very necessary because, as I said, it's not being recognized simply because it's not scientific. But I feel that it should be recognized, it should be researched, and be put as part of the policies in the country, because most countries have their own land policy, for instance, and then the land policy does not include Indigenous people. Another thing that I feel strongly should come out is the implementation of FPIC in every project that's being done, so that at least free, prior, and informed consent to the people. And then that is a whole document that can be mainstreamed in the development of the policies in the country. Another thing that I wanted to mention is, apart from FPIC, also is access to benefit sharing. These are the documents that should actually appear in the development projects and in development documents, so that communities and indigenous people should be part and parcel of that development. Because unfortunately, everything is done without FPIC, without even environmental impact assessment, without ABS documents. And then indigenous people are just completely disregarded, disrespected, and ignored. And so we would like that we walk together this journey from the beginning to the implementation. And then we have laws also in this in the countries that, especially like as I told you, most forests are gazetted, and then they belong, so automatically then they belong to the government. But you cannot go and suddenly just say that this is gazetted and then you disregard the people who are there for millions of years. Definitely they are the ones who are the best in utilizing, because on it. They depend on it for medicine, they depend on it for life, depend on it throughout their lives. So they should be put as part of the strategies to do development in that country. Yeah. 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 Very true. True.
Wilma, could we hear from you now? Are you hearing us? Yes, I can hear you. Okay, perfect. Thank you. We've been having some audio issues throughout the session, but glad to know that you're hearing us. Okay, so Wilma, I really liked what you shared about the territorial challenges. And in part, what we're trying to create now is a space to generate some recommendations to better recognize the role of Indigenous women in biodiversity conservation. So imagine we are in front of a large decision-making body. Someone's here to listen to you and take your recommendations to heart. What would you recommend to high-level decision makers at the national or international level, or even at the local level, so that they can effectively recognize the role of Indigenous women in biodiversity conservation? Yes. I just wanted to say my computer battery is dying and I need to plug in. I'm sorry. Okay, that's okay. Maybe if someone else wants to speak first, you can chime in.
I think we should recognize the women indigenous leader in decision making. I think what I really feel is like to the government, they should listen to the voices of the women, because women have a lot of indigenous knowledge with them, though like the men tries to be like more knowledgeable. But for my experience within working in my community, that the women have a lot of indigenous knowledge with them, so that has to be recognized. And even when the project or any kinds of development activity comes to the thing, I think the women their voices has to be heard. And I think we need to, bring a lot of indigenous women. I think they have more powerful in protecting their the territory and the biodiversity, because they are the one who is working so much, to protect, but did hardly they get any chance to, get platform. So we need a lot of capacity building for the women. We need a lot of, other platform forums to speak out the minds, this is what I wanted to recommend. And even in our indigenous, like we are very few, like me, like I'm training the young generation also, that we have to be in decision making. Otherwise, like nobody will come and say, but we have to participate in decision making. So this is what I really wanted to share.
So we've got Wilma. Wilma, would you like to speak? Oh, yes, I'm back. Just ran to the other office. Can you repeat the question, please? Yes, the question was, what recommendations would you give to better recognize the role of Indigenous women in biodiversity conservation? Yes. So the first recommendation at a local level, because you've got to look at the different levels where you can put forward your proposals and express what we're feeling and what we're doing. So the first thing is that we work from the local level toward the national and international. And we realize that it's at the national and international levels where you have to really make sure that voices are being heard. We get frustrated, but we want to focus on the good of everybody, not just a few. And so at a local level, we really want to be heard, not just our proposals and the things that we are protesting, but also the solutions that we have to generate good economies that are friendly to the environment without throwing our common home out of balance. And women have a lot of proposals for this in terms of the economy, conservation. And through our work, women can continue to use, for example, our traditional medicines. And we have knowledge about this. The issue of education as well, how we can carry out a type of education based on respect, based on our traditional practices, our agriculture, our ways of diversifying our economy and staying sustainable. So we want our policy ideas to be heard and jointly created with governments, including at the local level with mayors and municipalities. We want to be part of policy development. That's what we're always asking for. We want to be part of these processes. We want them to call us when they're gonna, for example, build a bridge. We don't want it just to all remain in Congress and at the formal level. We want to be able to express ourselves in terms of the implementation of public policy and the water that we so greatly need right now for everybody. We have proposals about how to sustain the rains and the water through the planting and the preservation of different types of trees that favor a good hydrological system. And many times there are plants introduced that are not suitable for our region. And we want the top-down policies to change because they're not generating a proper balance and harmony. Instead they're generating divisions. And the companies and the state are creating more conflicts. We don't want conflicts. We want to build. We want to live in peace where everybody has the opportunity to participate in a good economy, to have education and good health, and we can ensure that we have the vital elements of water and plants, and we want to make sure that we have the equilibrium that we need in our territories. So we know there are these international mechanisms, but also we want to reach the people who are funding these things. And we want them to know what things are really like on the ground. But it's so hard under Bolivian law. For example, CNAMIB, our organization, for the last 10 years, we've been working on getting a legal recognition for our group. And it's not viable. If you're going to receive funding, for example, you have to have a legal document proving your existence. They say that we Indigenous peoples have all the rights, but in the practice, it's really not like that. That's a huge weakness that we Indigenous peoples face. That's right, Wilma. And I wanted to say that one of the key elements in terms of policy advocacy at the Biological Diversity Convention is the Women's Caucus and the CBD Alliance and the other platforms. We have been loudly defending direct access to resources for communities. So that is something that is really important because everything we want to make sure that things are adequately funded and not necessarily from the top down. We need to make sure that the investments are really reaching people within territories and that they can have control. Okay, so we have one more question, I think. And you all have spoken about so many wonderful and interesting things. Thank you so much for the privilege of being able to listen to you today and feel the power of what you're saying. And we are in total solidarity with you all. Please know that you can count on us for any type of advocacy, support that you need in any of the spaces where we are working. We'll go to Chitira again.
Thank you. Thank you for those incredible stories, for sharing these challenges, the realities of what's going on the ground. And absolutely, it's an honor to witness, to bear witness to these stories today. we are now going to move gradually towards the end of the evening. So before we do that, we are going to Shruti Ajit of Women for Biodiversity and the CBD Women's Caucus to hear about CBD COP16 dialogues, to hear about the coming CBD COP16, to share a brief reflection on the relevance of the program of work on the implementation of Article 8J. So how can this instrument actually address Indigenous women's demands and support the preservation of traditional knowledge? All right, take it away, Shruti.
Thank you, Chitra, and to the entire GFC family for inviting me. It's truly an honor to be part of this amazing panel, and it's actually made me really nervous to follow after such inspiring women and such amazing stories that they've shared. So quickly, I hope to give as much information without making it too complex, so bear with me. So in this world where we as a humanity are dealing with multiple crises of climate change and biodiversity loss, it is imperative that we tackle the root causes, including patriarchy and the myriad of isms. So we have the colonialism, capitalism, extractivism, amongst others. So this requires a fundamental and systematic shift systemic as well, shift in how we deal with the world today. In this context, it is essential to understand that recognizing Indigenous and local women's role in conserving and preserving their territories of life is not one-dimensional and addresses various intersectional issues, as we have heard right before me in the plethora of examples shared by Wilma, Agnes, and Mayal. We know that the traditional knowledge that women hold deals with various aspects of ecological resilience, food and livelihood security, and health of the community and the ecosystem. So jumping quickly into the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, prior to the adoption of this framework in 2022, we must also acknowledge the history, which is the past, where there was a failure or a lack of recognition of Indigenous peoples and local communities in their conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, as is highlighted within what we had, the Aichi targets 14 and 18. And we know that there's been very low levels of implementation or recognition of these targets within various countries' biodiversity action plan and framework. However, this should not be seen as an impediment, but as collective learnings that informs our collaborative work that we have in front of us. Just highlighting one of the parts of the Global Biodiversity Framework, which is Section C, it guides the implementation of framework to ensure that contributions of Indigenous peoples and local communities, especially their rights, knowledge, including traditional knowledge associated with biodiversity, innovations, worldviews, values, and practices are respected and documented and preserved with their free, prior, and informed consent, including through their full and effective participation in decision-making in accordance with relevant national legislations, international instruments, including the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and Human Rights Law. This framework also calls upon a human rights-based and gender-responsive approach while strengthening the whole of society and whole of government aspects. We also have recognition through this within various targets, where we have target 3, which is the protected area 30 by 30 target, where we also have target 22 and 23, which recognizes key aspects of decision-making, access to justice, and gender equality, which these must guide all the work to confront issues related to biodiversity loss. And that's why we have the framework as it is. The terms that I just shared with you may seem complicated and jargonistic, but it has resulted from a significant work done by various groups, including the indigenous peoples, local communities, women, youth, and civil society organizations who were constantly advocating for some of this to be recognized. And it took probably years or even decades to come to where we are right now. So now the framework is one of the many aspects countries need to consider while updating their biodiversity strategies and action plans. And this is something that we are going to be discussing in the Convention of Parties, 16th Convention of Parties, which is happening in Colombia in October. The framework itself needs to be informed by various decisions adopted within CBD, notably the new program of work of Article 8J and related provisions, and of course the gender plan of action as well, which is one of the key decisions which was also adopted in Montreal in 2022. Yolanda was very generous, and she's shared some of and given us the context and the history of 8J and how women were mobilized and how it was people have participated and engaged with 8J and the history of it. So I'm not going to go into that, but I want to highlight some of the key elements that this new program of work is talking about, and these are things that we need to build a collective strategy, and I think it's already happening. So this new program of work is guided by a gender responsive approach as well as the gender plan of action, and it comprises of 8 elements. So the first element is to talk about restoration and conservation of biological diversity led by indigenous people and local communities, including developing guidelines of best practices to secure land tenure and governance, the inclusion and consideration of traditional lands and resource use in spatial planning processes and environmental impact assessments per national legislations and international obligations. The second one is to promote, encourage, and ensure the sustainable use of biological diversity, amongst other things, to respect and protect the customary sustainable use by indigenous people and local communities. The third one we have is to promote the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the utilization of genetic resources, traditional knowledge associated with genetic resources, and digital sequence information on genetic resources. The fourth one we have is to support the transmission and protection of traditional knowledge, including to future generations, and ensure that traditional knowledge and other knowledge systems are valued equally. The fifth one we have is to contribute to the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework through the full and effective implementation of decisions, principles, and guidelines of relevance for indigenous peoples and local communities. The sixth one we have is to enable the full and effective participation of indigenous peoples and local communities, including women, girls, and youth from indigenous peoples and local communities in decision-making related to biodiversity and implementing the Global Biodiversity Framework. The seventh one is to contribute to the enhancement of the rights of indigenous people and local communities for the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity in line with the human rights-based approach. And the final one is to have direct access to funding for indigenous people and local communities for the conservation, restoration, and sustainable use of biodiversity. Now, listening to these 8 elements, which is part of the new program of work, it is only imperative that indigenous and local women are integral for its full realization, and be it with regards to their role in the intergenerational transfer of knowledge, their participation in crucial decision-making institutions at all levels, and their rights to govern, protect, and manage and sustainably use their territories, being finally recognized by the parties who are signatories to the convention. Therefore, we must collectively strengthen our strategies to demand that our respective countries effectively include this new program of work while revising their biodiversity strategies and plans to reflect their the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which is to be brought up during the October COP meeting. So I think with that concluding, the stories and experiences that were shared by Wilma, Agnes, and Mayal were really, really inspiring, but also gives us sense of what the reality is today. These need to be recognized, these need to be respected, these needs to be considered while all of these policies that are happening at COP level and all these documents that are written, it needs to be considered. These stories are not just stories, but actual lived realities of various women. So these experiences and learnings resonate with all of us, our own experiences and the knowledge we have received from our grandmothers, and one day we hope to pass on to our children and grandchildren. Finally, I want to end with a common saying. It says, our grandmother crawled so that our mothers could walk, so that we could run. So let's keep this momentum going so that our future generation could fly, guided by the knowledge of our ancestors. Thank you. In solidarity, Johar.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shruti. And what a wonderful, wonderful note to close that on, truly. And I think anybody who's listened to this webinar is already flying. So I think we're off to a good start. Thank you so much, Shruti. We're actually, there's so many threads of this conversation have come up in the last nearly couple of hours. So now we're going to sort of weave them together into a closing sort of fabric. Our Policy Director, Global Forest Coalition's Policy Director, Mary Lou, will do the closing session for us. But Mary has also been having some technical issues. Mary Lou, could you tell us if you are able to hear us or join us? Okay. All right, we might not have Mary Lou with us, but we saw some hands earlier in the room. We saw there were people who had questions or comments, and earlier we couldn't get to you, but we welcome you to put your hands up again or put your question in the chat if you would like to speak. So please feel free. You can speak. You can ask your questions directly to any of our panelists today, or if you prefer, if it's a general comment, feel free. We would love to hear from you, actually. So please feel free to. I remember there were 2 or 3 hands in the audience. Would anyone like to go? Yes, Lola, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me? Good morning. My name is Lola Carnal from Guatemala. And I'm part of CNAMIB. It's in a rural community. And we work with young women and men to promote education and extracurricular education in different topics that are being mentioned here. And I think all the presentations were very important. And I think as a woman and as part of a working process that we have been working not just locally, but nationally and internationally with the groups that are being involved in these processes, we consider that it's important that governments and decision makers react to these proposals that as Indigenous people will be presenting in the COP16, because we think it's very important to promote and strengthen the capacities and development of Indigenous women in the practices and knowledge of ancestral knowledge, and to respect and recognize that those practices are the ones that in the first place have promoted resilience and sustainability to confront the climate change that we are facing in our communities. And on top of that, we think it's very important that we I actually lacked the intervention of a colleague that spoke before that said that that promoting education, it's important to promote an education that talks about our reality in our countries, and it needs to be to strengthen the knowledge and practices of the young people, because we work in Guatemala with those processes, and we know that we have had many victories to promote that type of capacities with the young people. And the other thing is to strengthen the knowledge of Indigenous women in terms of the transfer of knowledge to young people, because something that is happening right now is that the use of technology by young people, because they're not using it in an adequate way and in a way that makes sense, and that's ending the importance of passing that knowledge, that ancestral knowledge, and the respect that we need to give to Mother Nature and biodiversity. I feel that that's a way to be able to guarantee that as women we can move forward, and more than even access to financing. In our communities, they organize women, but we have had many issues to access that financing source and to promote those activities that we are working on a daily basis. We need to understand how women can access those funds. There needs to be flexibility. There needs to be a way, a strategy, so women and organizations, Indigenous organizations, can be part of that finance sources. Because when we talk about financing, that's a topic that it's being discussed internationally, the direct access to that financing for the Indigenous people. So people are asking, what does it mean for us to have that access? For us, it means that if we can get access to that financing, we don't need to be seen as beneficiaries of the funds. We need to be strategic partners, and that they need to trust the Indigenous and Indigenous women organizations to implement those projects. They think that it's very easy to strengthen our ancestral work, but we cannot do it without having that access and without being seen as key partners. So we consider that very important, and so that the gender action plans internationally that are being implemented need to pay attention to the countries and the governments, that if there are gender plans in our countries, for instance, in Guatemala, we have that action plan. But since we have been working with them, we've never seen any implementation besides some meetings where we review them, but we're just reviewing them all the time and evaluating them, but never implementing them. So I think we need to assure that that gets done. Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you, Lola. Yes, absolutely. Financing is one part of the solution. Being seen as equal partners, agents of change, absolutely key. But also, how do we keep this conversation? How do we keep this movement building and going and strengthening, right? Not just year after year, but decade after decade, century after century. Fantastic. Oh, we love these interventions, please. Yes. Okay, now we have Patrick, whose hand is up. Go ahead, Patrick.
Yes, thank you so much for giving me the floor. I'm Patrick Mukanga, and I work in a local organization that works for women rights and also Indigenous people rights in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So it was really interesting. Thank you so much for all the presentations. Thank you for sharing your methodologies that are really interesting. And we really want to invite Indigenous people from our community to really stand up for their rights so that they can be voiced also. And I would like to share a case that we experimented in our country, in North Kivu, especially. In this region, Indigenous people are living really a hard time. They were living before from their lands, but because of the war, they are being compelled to go to the cities. And once they get to the towns and cities, this is being really complicated. They are not integrated. Their activities, they can do their activity. They can do anything, actually, of what they had been doing before. So when organization promotes Indigenous people, it is important that they look to Congo, that they look to this complex situation. Shruti, you were speaking about CDB and other negotiations. In our organization, we are in direct contact with Indigenous people, and we could get accreditation for one person to participate to COP16, but he doesn't have any sustain yet. This could have been a good opportunity for this person to share what's happening, to being heard. But now we are asking ourselves, how can we help for this? How can we help him? Because he has accreditation, but he has no supports. So if we can really go from words to actions, I think this is key. We need to support local community actions. This is what we need to visibilize. We need politicals to really see what is happening on the local level so that they can integrate in their national strategy everything and everyone. Thank you so much.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Patrick, for raising some of these concerns that I think all of us know people who are in this similar situations. And this is a room full of brilliant, powerful people who might be able to share strategies and ideas. Maybe there's help out there that we are able to bring together. So, Patrick, if you would like to share, if you'd like to, you can share your contact details in the chat, or if you would like people to be able to reach out to you if they have any ideas or possible solutions for this person. But also, this is all to say, this conversation does not end here. This conversation is going to keep continuing. We're going to come back to you with recordings and all the resources that people have so kindly shared in the chat today. And speaking of resources, I also want to mention a publication that we recently was able to get out about the Kukama women who had a landmark legal victory. I'm sure many of us already know about this case, but recently we had a publication, which I think, Valentina, if you could share the links to the op-ed, which was written by our very own Juana. Thank you, Juana, for sharing your story with us. We have a story and some photos taken by the Indigenous women themselves about how they secured an amazing victory. I hope all of you can see the slide. So this story, for those of you who might be unfamiliar, is about a group of Indigenous women in Peru who successfully secured legal protection for the Marañón River, recognizing its sacredness and right to life of the river itself, which is really, I mean, the world we're all building towards, right? And so this is a huge, huge step forward for preserving water, forests, and biodiversity. And there we can see the women there in the water that now has a life and dignity and right to exist of its own, not just through human beings. The victory of our Kukama sisters is of enormous significance since it provides monumental inspiration for the struggles of the Amazonian peoples against the many extractive activities that are destroying their territories. Absolutely. Hopefully this, we want this to set a precedence all over the world for the whole system to begin to fall like a deck of cards. And this case and the judgment on this gives us so much hope. And thank you again, once again, Juana, for writing this article. And yeah, so we will share all of this with you in a follow-up email as well. But yeah, and yeah, I think that brings us to the end of this webinar. I'm still buzzing with all of the great, powerful stories that I heard here today. I'm sure many of us feel the same way. Thank you so much to all of the speakers, all of the panelists who were so generous with their time, with their stories, with their experiences of not only pain but also joy, their steadfastness in this. We're in this together. We really are. And to second Valentina again, we're with you in every way. We are ready to support you in every way that we can. Thank you so much to the interpreters for making this event possible. We could not have done this without you, absolutely. But yes, so that brings us to the end of today's event. Thank you, everyone for joining us. Feel free to keep the conversation going. And maybe we can all unmute and say thank you to our speakers and our interpreters. It would be lovely to hear from all.
Yes. Thank you also.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, everyone would like to get a picture taken.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you,
Good night, everyone. Good
everybody.
night.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you so much. Yes. Thank you,
Thank
my
you.
dear. Thank you for the invitation. All right. Thank you.